Good morning, everyone.
Hi.
Hello, Samar. Welcome to Live with Ghalia. But today, with you, Samar, we'll be talking about rituals in retail. If we want to just like label our session, Samar, who are you? What do you do? And what about Samar ritual?
Of course, great question. Hi, Galia. You look beautiful as usual. My name is Samar, as you said. And what I do is I'm an artist, I'm a futurist, and I focus a lot on innovation, which makes me an innovation catalyst. I love thinking about the future and experiences and human experience in particular. And because of my interest in art, culture, as well as sort of technology and science, I use a lot of neuroaesthetic principles in a lot of my practice. I founded Samaritual, which is my consultancy in 2018. And the reason why I called it ritual, because I think rituals are so important. They're important as a cultural sort of phenomenon for people in general, how they sort of conduct their lives in general. But also, I think from a sort of commerce perspective, when we think about connection and connecting to people, because that's what most experiences are people related. I think it's important to think of those experiences as rituals as well, because they're also unique and kind of create more value for particular kind of unique kind of brands. So.
Mhm. Thank you for that. But what was the trigger? Along the years, I think when we work in retail, we get to reflect, to see things differently at different periods and times and angles.
Mhm.
What was the trigger that led you to thinking of consumption as a ritual? Have you seen like several phases in retail that have led you to think about this?
Of course. To start with, I never thought I was going to be in retail. My goal has always been sort of like, how can we create more social discourse, through experiences in general and art in particular. And for me, retail was just another sort of place in which I thought was very important to sort of cultivate that. As I started my career 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. I'm not going to age it exactly, but it was with anthropology, and I was an artist in one of the stores. And obviously, anthropology in particular is very art centric and very experience centric. So it sort of broke the mold. But for me, it was never around consumption. Although, if you want to think of traditional retail revolved around the purchase of goods. So basically, your touch point, your end touch point has always been sort of to transactional. You're buying a good. But I think modern retail is much more similar to 19th century kind of shops in the way that it's more about participatory and anticipatory, because the value and what you're buying, you're not really buying necessarily a tangible good. It's not necessarily a transaction. It's more, it builds cultural currency and social currency for the brand. And what that means is it's sort of, instead of like thinking of like a marketplace where it's more about like very transactional, very market driven, it's more people driven versus market community driven. And it allows you to sort of think about your experience in a much more meaningful way when you interact with such brands. So that could be, a participatory experience, it could be an event. The currency that you kind of build is, it could be like a relational quality in which I really align with the aesthetic of that brand. I really align with its values. So suddenly you sort of are building these intimate relationships. And of course, one of the most intimate relationship and most important is service and concierge kind of service, which is very synonymous with whether there is technology or not, that's like the human connection. That's like a big part of the ritual, and that's something that has always been the fabric of many like smaller shops from,
Yeah.
back in the older days when the idea of retailing. And you and I are both Lebanese, and it's funny if you think of the very first traders that were on boats, which are like our ancestor, the Phoenician, and the idea of like trading goods is very much now to me back related to how modern day retail should be, because I love the idea of like collecting and trading much more than buying. Even the idea of buying is antiquated, because buying is very market driven, is very much done, as sort of like a very transactional data driven way. Versus if you think of like the idea of trading is more about collecting. It's much more culturally driven. It's about taste making. It's about like, building, bringing what I don't have, giving it to you and sort of exchanging it. But in the sense of like a brand, it's collecting all these different things and layers within its brand space that build that cultural value. And that's what makes it more exciting.
Right. And listening to you talking about this, I couldn't help myself but think that if retail has been very formatted and very related to the transactional aspect for the past couple of decades or maybe even 40 years, retail today is becoming more local, more geographically centered, and very much connected to the local aspect of consumption, right? So we're seeing like a phenomenon that is completely ditching, if we want to use that term, everything that we have been going through, that this formatted retail process or way of doing things. But this complicates also things, Samar. It means that retailers or brands have to understand this local environment. They have to understand and translate everything related to that environment, and of course, the consumer or customer to deliver that hyper personalized or concierge experience, as you call it. So, how do you read all of this information?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. That's why sort of I think about it more as like this is how things were in the old days. I think globalization, it did two things. Like if you think of cities in general, each city, why do you enjoy a city very specifically? Because I think retailers in particular are part of the fabric of that city, whether it's retail and hospitality. Both of those are unique signifier of that city. So when I go to Tokyo, when I go to Beirut, there are very specific experiences, including shopping experience, including places that I want to go that are so unique to that city and I really value. And they have been in that city as the local sort of entity forever. Now, when you think about traditional retail, what it did is with globalization, it sort of like catapulted all these chain retailers to go in all these different cities. And they kind of, because it's transactional, because basically in a traditional retailer, I want to buy good, then if that means it's transactional, if it's goods, the sort of end product, let me open more stores to buy more good, instead of thinking about it in a sort of modern way. When you sort of think about it in a modern way, when you go into a city as a sort of chain retailer or a retailer that has more than one store, what is the sort of value, if I think about myself as a brand, that I want to create that's so unique to that localization, in which if somebody's visiting, why would they want to come to me versus go to that store in a different city? Like, what makes me so unique? Why would I want to go to the store that has a chain all over the place?
Yeah.
And that sort of makes it, that's sort of where you think about culture and sort of connection when it comes to community. And it's more about like, I think what's sort of interesting, some brands have been doing it here and there, where they're building like either collections and sort of like curated product offering as X like a local shop. It could be like sort of a like a local sort of like famous sweet shops with like a sneaker company that's like a big company, but they do like a limited capsule and they sort of bring in the sort of locality where you can only uniquely buy that product and access that product in that city, and maybe in a limited sort of time capsule, thinking omni-channel also digitally, but like thinking more about what is that social currency that I'm sort of aiding my brand and integrating it with those ritual of that city. And those ritual are made out of all these local very unique experiences and unique shops and unique sort of cultural phenom that are in that particular city.
Yeah, and this brings us to translate a new word that we are using more and more in retail, which is meaning, like meaningful shopping experiences. What what is the definition of meaning in today's retail experience?
That I mean, I think obviously retail and hospitality, I think they're super interconnected because ultimately when you exit your house, the idea of when you're outside and when you're experiencing any sort of thing when you're outside of your house, your journey as sort of a person in which you are sort of going about your business and exploring. So what do you want as a human being? Sort of what's the value that you want for yourself when you exit your place? You want to sort of feel entertained and happy, like excited. You want like all these sort of like hormones to be stimulated, whether it's like excitement or you want to be rested. You want like there's different needs that you might have based on how you're feeling. So typically those needs are met by the different establishment that you kind of go to. You're going to a bar, you want to have drink for a reason, you want to go shop for a reason, but like ultimately all of them are some sort of form of therapy and some sort of like there is like a more interconnected meaning in terms of what is my end goal. Like, and I think the biggest meaning when you exit your house, aside from like your family or your tight knit family within your house, is accessing community, is accessing other people, it's
Mm,
socializing.
mm,
And that's
mm,
basically the social currency that we're talking about. And the meaningful thing is, if I'm socializing, I want to sort of see or kind of access like-minded things. So I want things that align with my value. I want things that look like me, sort of like respond to my culture, respond to all the values that I'm about. And when we talk about meaning, it's as simple as like understanding like who are these people that are within that particular city and what is their lifestyle? What are they the most, not only do they need for me to sort of like just make and like for consumption purpose, but how can I aid that society? Like if it is like, is it a high stress area? Is it sort of an area in which there is like incredible artisans that are sort of minority owned and they don't have enough of a voice? Like what are the things in which I could build sort of a business plan that makes sense for that unique particular community? And that's how you sort of think about building meaning.
mm. And this approach is very different because it's like a bottom-up approach, right? You would be looking at everything that's around you and build up a brand process. However, when we're talking about brands, there is always a tendency when the brand grows and maybe becomes more national or international to have a system or a process. With this concept in marketing and branding and retailing related to hyper personalization might jeopardize the management process. Would it make it difficult today for brands to be able to measure their success through all of these actions that they are doing?
Yeah, because everything can ultimately become very formulaic in the sense where you can create structures and systems in order for you to scale with uniqueness and to scale with sort of like it with things to measure data with and give you sort of like a variety of feedback. And you can get that information a lot through your local representative and also a variety of technology in which you use to measure whether it's like foot traffic, whether it is interaction, whether it is feedback. There is like a different ways in which you can engage your community to kind of get that sort of feedback. And as far as scaling and thinking locally, it's part of your brand strategy. Like as you are sort of developing, whether you have, 1,000 stores globally or 10 stores like, and not necessarily nationally, let's say, there is always ways to be unique. Like I think being unique is more sustainable too, and ultimately it will kind of balance out from a sort of bottom line perspective as far as like revenue and sort of cost, because locality is the only way in which you can sort of really build your brand to kind of be more long lasting and not sort of be gone with the wind. And sort of the more locally you engage, whether it is even with the people that are building your space or sort of engaging with your space, the more sustainable your practice is, because you're not sort of spending all this money to just like ship things from all over the place. And I
Yes.
see a lot of that phenomena, or sort of that adaptation to starting a lot more with like food retailers. Like they're thinking of like nano warehousing or smaller warehousing where it's easy to replenish and sort of things are available locally. So it's more about like a bigger strategy, thinking of like everything from how you sort of like curate your assortment, of course, how you sort of replenish that assortment, what structures are in place for me to sort of be super efficient, super localized, super personalized for my particular customer, but also like thinking of the infrastructure that's behind that validates and enables all this.
So some are more brands are investing and putting more investments related to art. As opposed to the previous years, we're not shrinking this investment into art, and we are allowing more creativity into our spaces. How can you interpret that?
Um, Great question. So art and design are becoming like a big, huge sort of part of a lot of brand experiences. And obviously they become more grandiose with each brand sort of try to sort of outdo one another in general.
Mm,
What happens is everybody wants to go viral. Everybody sort of wants to engage people. They want to sort of create these experiences in which people take pictures, they can post on Instagram. And obviously a lot of them too could be signal status, as in, oh, I was in this store at this sort of city with this experience. So for the sort of person that's sort of engaging, it's also signal status. So I think there's two things. There is pros and cons to it, is what I'm saying. One aspect of it, I think it's important to, when you think about art is much more unique, much more eclectic, much more sort of, you know, cultural, as well as of course beautiful. So you're engaging with it, but it also there's so much more layers to it. And when you think of like experiences that are just trying to sort of outdo one another and sort of be copy paste of one another, I think it's important to understand that you still want to be very unique. So it's not about competing and sort of trying to sort of, oh, I'm going to do this more awing experience, or no, I'm going to do more. What is the experience that's going to be very unique for your brand? What are the sort of feeling material stories that are very unique to your brand in order to kind of create the most immersive experience? And I think art is part of the idea that we kind of tackled at the beginning of this conversation, which is curatorial, like curating art experience, because artists are the people who narrate and sort of speak a lot about what the specifically local city that you're in, and obviously using art and capitalizing on sort of like art, engaging art within the local community, and thinking of experiences that, instead of thinking of them as, let me create something extraordinary that's sort of very related to the collection of the brand, let me create something extraordinary related to what is the ritual of my customer that's going to go and experience it. how is it anticipatory? Instead of that customer just taking a picture and just leaving, how can
Mm.
it be less overwhelming? Because I want them to also experience the product. So how
Yeah.
can it be less overwhelming and more sort of like tactilely engaging, where I'm engaging the emotion of the customer? What are the different senses and the ebbs and flow that are happening with that set experience? I look at it very much like a game. And when we talk about a game, meaning like, you know how during a game you're going like step one, stage one, and then you go to level two, level three. This is sort of very much in terms of how you can build an experience flow in which the design is sort of is parallel to it. What material are you using? What lighting are you using? How are you sort of like if how are you sort of like curating how you want the customer to feel at
Mm.
every step of the way, because you
Mm.
don't want them to feel this rush, like super
All of
excitement
a sudden, yes.
all of a sudden, because you're
Yes.
basically taking them to the level 8 of the game without first bringing them to level 1, without even like showing them what this is about when you kind of see like a level 3 a level 8
Yeah.
suddenly. So I
Yeah.
think it's just creating like a being much more purposeful in how you build the sensory experiences.
Yes.
And again, I think that's like what I mean by like the ritual of, like, typically when you go through a ritual, whether you're brushing your teeth or whether you're sort of like, you have this kind of habit in which you spend, you know Sunday with your grandma or whatever it is. There is these habitual thing in which, if you think about it, I'm experiencing this brand in this particular city. What is something so unique, and I love it so much that I want to do it over and over, and it's like becomes like so unique to that brand experience and design.
Right. And it's beautiful how you have put it. And it also goes in that same direction that customers have to become experienced with the brand. We are all novices at certain point, and then when we engage in that community, we develop certain competencies, certain ways of doing things, and we can teach others or be taught by others, and this also helps us connect better and grow and experience things differently at different time to reach that ultimatum. And I believe that technology today becomes an integral part of that experience. Mostly retail and online are merging, but also transactional and communications are coming together. So, how do you see that when you're designing or when you're thinking of designing experiential spaces?
Um, Technology, of course, it's incredible with what it's changing. As somebody who creates experiences and as an artist and creator, now the technology is enabling you to sort of completely entirely change your creative flow in order to generate these ideas, because you have all these things from artificial intelligence to sort of like different ways in which, or tools, I see them as tools in your arsenal that you can use to further engage the senses. Those tools could be augmented reality, there is virtual reality, there is ways in which, a more amplified ways to kind of, get things that are more customized for you, or get sort of things that are much more seamless within your experience. And technology allows you to do that, allows you to sort of like dim or sort of react to your customer in ways that in the past you would have never been able to do. Whether it is, you want them to be able to move certain things, you're able to do that now. If you're able to, like, there is a lot of sensor that you can sort of utilize and maximize. So technology for me, if it's used well, it's used at the service of humanity, and it's used at the service of your customer in building a brand experience that is really ultimate. And I also think that because the future is about people experiencing goods that are both, or collecting goods that are both tangible, like real good, but also intangible, like digital goods, with technology and with design, kind of thinking about spaces or brands, especially the brands that do sell also intangible good, how would those kind of show up within your retail environment? How can you
Hmm.
sort of like curate both and kind of like showcase both goods in a way that feels really engaging and exciting, and create areas in which people can co-create as well with the help of technology, whether they're 3D printing their own things by sort of personalizing it in the space and thinking of how that space would ultimately serve them.
But then comes the next question. Sometimes when we talk about designing experiences, it feels like a serious thing. We need to think about many things and we need to put in a lot of effort and investment. However, we're inviting each time small brands, startup brands, as well as mature brands to go into experiences and invest into creating experiences. But is it easy for a smaller startup brand who has very few or shy investments to start with, think of developing experiences? And could experiences be developed with the simpler things?
Absolutely. I mean, technology, of course, is cost prohibitive, but technology is not, uh, not all of it is cost prohibitive. I think to me, there is a few things that are super important in building experiences that are to do with how you sort of strategize and go about it. What's most important is maximizing a more sustainable mindset. And if you have a sustainable mindset, no matter what your budget is, you're able to sort of really create amazing things. What a great sort of design has nothing to do with the cost. It's more about the ingenuity of how the design is done. I think thinking local is number one. So thinking of like incredible material use, whether you're recycling, upcycling, sort of like reutilizing material from things that are around you or within like 100 sort of mile radius, in which you can sort of repurpose and create something amazing, is great. I think it's also thinking about developing things such as like your fixture programming and everything that you're doing with sort of a more upcycled mindset, with sort of utilizing your local artisans and craftsmen as a community, with sort of like rethinking of like, can I go to this junkyard and collect like sort of a million pieces of old baluster from that was sort of repurposed from a place, get with an artisan and create something amazing. All these things are more ingenuity and thinking of creatively versus sort of saying, oh, I don't have the money, I'm just going to buy something that's really cheapy somewhere and do it. No, it doesn't. I don't think, for me, the reason why I say I don't think budget is limiting, because, you know, I started, as I told you, as an artist in one of the stores at Anthropology when I first started my career. And most of every experiences that we used to create was done out of super humble material, very, very cheaply. It was all upcycled, recycled. But the care and the time it took to create those, the craftsmanship that it took to
Mm,
create those,
mm, mm.
that was the part that was wowing. That was the part that customers really appreciated because of the craftsmanship and the artisanship. And we actually created pieces of art. And I think when you think of building experiences, if you don't have money, it's more about, being able to, if you can't do it alone, being able to get a strategist to help you. What do I prioritize? How can I do? It's more about less is more, but the more is more about the less is more about creating things that are super well crafted, super well designed, in a very thoughtful way to create a beautiful brand experience. It's not about doing a lot, and it's not about all the bells and whistles.
Yes,
The
it's
bells and
giving more
whistles are
meaning.
great when you have a big brand, because, and even then you still have to be very deliberate. The problem when you do have a big budget, you just overdo it sometime, and you just like, it's more and more, and things could get diluted unless you have like a really strong brand narrative and brand sort of like our direction and point of view.
I mean, this is a very good point. And as you said, we might all get lost along the way if we don't have that clear brand identity, philosophy, and strategy. And mostly, as you said, the importance of being able to create and to cater for our brand culture. So, coming to that point, finally, if we can just redraw our thoughts, how can brand customer relations become more meaningful in the future? This being said, in a context of retail, this meaningful relationship has to be fruitful. So, in your opinion, how can this customer brand relationship become more and more meaningful?
Um, so a lot of ways that I think about is what am I building as a brand, as like this very unique, like, experience and immersion that almost feels like a ceremony. It feels like almost like a celebratory ceremony that I am sort of engaging my customer in as soon as they step foot on the door in the door. Even before actually they step foot in the door, is starts with like your facade, or starts with even the space in which, whether it's like a temporary space or a permanent space. Like, it starts with the shell in which, what space did I choose from a real estate perspective, and what is the sort of like first step that I'm sort of engaging? What ceremony am I building around my particular customer to have them really engage? And it's almost like the idea of joindre l'utile à l'agréable, which you know exactly what that means. There is, obviously, if I'm translating it, it's hard to translate in English, but it's like joining the
The
fun and the
functional,
beautiful immersion with the sort
yes,
of like really like practical realness.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you need both of those. It's almost like a set of ingredients. So you need both of those things to create this beautiful ceremony or ritual. And those experiences are, make sure that your space is always, whether it's like big or not, whether there is like a lot of opportunity or less opportunities, there is
Mhm.
always like concierge like service, personalized service somewhat. If there is a way in which you can engage with your community in any shape or form, whether it is reselling old things that you might have to kind of engage a circular kind of economical sort of structure, or um, engaging your local caterer for an event, or engaging, like, thinking of all the sort of things that you can build as far as the ceremony of your particular brand, in terms of how can it engage the maximizing the community. And that happens a lot with like activation and an event that you do with a brand, but also certain times it's things that happen on a, it could be happening on a weekly basis. These are like the type of ritual that you would do. Maybe you're engaging a local band, a musician that's sort of coming on a weekly basis. Whatever that might be, there is a lot of ways in which you're building that ceremony of sort of like care, that sort of building that relationship, not only with your customer, but also like the subculture of the local community and all the sort of subculture around it. So you're kind of diving deeper and sort of reaffirming your value and cultural sort of currency of who you want to be aligned with, and how is that sort of further making my brand more relevant. The brands of today are more like these very kind of unique collectors of experiences, as well as that's how they build their brand. The brand is not done only with goods, it's also social and it's also cultural currency altogether. So all those things need to happen in a store. So you want to think about, obviously, we said concierge services, we said also how is your space the most, not only most beautiful, but the most kind of well-being centric to your customer. So when somebody's coming to my space, what material am I choosing? What experiences am I choosing, that not only are they here to sort of experience my brand, but they're getting some sort of therapy? Because if you care about your customer and you're also caring about their well-being, that is like the primary function. And there is a lot of ways you can flip retail therapy on its head. As true retail therapy, there is a lot of ways you could do that. And that starts with thinking of how your changing room are built, how there's certain experiences within the store that are very dedicated towards like wellness. It could be something as simple as a tea ceremony to like a sort of dopamine sort of inducing sound experience. It could be all these things that are part of those, again, ritual that are part of your brand, whether it is a retail or hospitality. Both of those are equal. I think other things that sort of are also important and engaging to kind of create that sort of ceremony is thinking about what are the particular architectural characteristics that are in that space that I can utilize and sort of like amplify to kind of, if they're super unique, they become part of that ritual in which the customer will come back to again and again. And then lastly, the two things are always create some sort of opportunity for co-creation. That co-creation does not have to be where you always have a even if you don't have an actual product to customize. Let's
Yes.
say I don't have, like, let's say a way to kind of create a product, customize a product, whatever that might be. What are the ways you can create the opportunity for co-creation? Can you sort of have an amazing gift wrap station in which people are engaging and learning different gift wrapping techniques, as
Mm-hmm.
the art of gifting is the art of care, and like how can you think of other ways in which they're participating in your brand by co-creating and kind of bringing in some of learning in an educational way,
Mm-hmm.
but also kind of being able to purchase things in very smaller way. Let's say you have a beautiful packaging, and that packaging is something that they feel that it's a culture currency in which makes them feel part of the brand. They have a smaller budget, and you're making them feel great if you give them the opportunity to not alienate them if they don't have the budget to buy something big. They can still participate by kind of buying the smallest things or sort of creating a packaging within your own kind of like brand packaging that sort of amplify sort of your brand. And then lastly, I think the transaction ceremony is very important. I think I mentioned it maybe to you once about like how amazing it was when I was like in Japan, the retail experience, how that particular ceremony of how they get your credit card or sort of like they presented it with a tray, and it felt like so meaningful that even that very uh, the minute final touch point in which you're buying something be much more frictionless, because that has to be like the most frictionless as possible. So if it's a card or if it's sort of is something more advanced, making that so deliberate, making that ritual so purposeful, and kind of creating it creates like the energy in the store. Of course, I think making sure that you hire people that represent the culture in which you're in and sort of have representation, and people that represent your brand and how they're wearing and how they're presenting themselves. If you want to feel a bit more artistic, like whatever your culture or wherever you want to represent, all these signals within your store or within your space, within your hotel or your restaurant, they need to signify those things. And I think that's how you could build seamlessly a customer relationship that feel meaningful, deliberate, and really well done for your brand,
Mm-hmm.
where the community will rally around you if something were to happen. And like a pandemic where things got shut down, people couldn't afford, a smaller retailer couldn't afford to keep their stores, but if they have gone beyond measure to really serve their community over the years, the community would rally behind you, just like we've seen a lot in a lot of cities where a lot of local stores almost went out of business that have been there for like 20 years, 30 years. They are the fabric of the city that people saved them.
Yes,
The
yes.
community saved them.
And because there was that special connection between both, and that things made sense between the brand and the customer, like there was this natural relationship. And I believe what you're trying to say, that whatever we do, we have to be concentrated on that brand story, the brand's essence, and everything that should happen should fall naturally within that atmosphere, that brand sphere, actually. And we all need to share the same ethos for us to live the meaning and truly participate into creating more meaning into that. And this is beautiful. Wow. I mean, like listening to all of this, we have hope for for retail and the and the upcoming new years
I think
because
so. I think it's very hopeful, but like I think the culture has been like really like robbed, and I think a lot of the sort of initial purpose of retail about creating, awe, about creating wonder, about creating amazing escape experiences, beautiful ways in which the customer can engage and feel a part of something was at one point really unique and the desire, but it sort of got lost along the way when brands were very like top down
yeah,
and really like lost track of how can I really serve my community, but how am I adapting to all the changes? Am I being really sensitive to what's happening in the world, what's happening with my local community? What
right,
it's like a give and take, and it's like always evolving, and I think that's very important to sort of like understand how can I serve them, even though I'm a brand that sells this, but around me in this radius there is no why. Can I sort of like, engage somebody that's why in my brand in order to give more for my community? There's
right.
so much that could be done, and I think that's exciting.
That's cool. Samar, by the end of this beautiful talk, is there anything else that you would like to add related to our topic or any ideas, maybe opinions that you would like to share, or give some insights or implications to managers who are not yet thinking about integrating these processes into their brand management?
Yeah, I think, strategy is so important. I think taking time to really like study and engage with people. You can rely a lot on data, but having also case studies and sort of like one-on-one with the community and really engaging and really thinking of your strategy in a really holistic ways, thinking about what can I do not only for my community and my brand, but me as a brand that has a purpose and want to sort of leave a good sort of footprint in that world. What am I doing from a social perspective to be a better future ancestor? Like, what can I do from a sort of social footprint in my strategy through my system, my narrative, to sort of think about all these things that are so important nowadays, which is the environment, which is sustainability, which is, representation, diversity within my footprint. All these things should be a very sort of very thought out within how people would experience my brand. And I think it's okay that strategy takes a little bit longer because then execution will be much more seamless. But I think these are all things that should be prioritized because it's much harder to sort of fix them after you launch, because first impression is everything. And customer can sniff inauthenticity. Authenticity is so important, and they can sniff fakers, they can sniff people that are just doing it for the gram, and they're just doing it for show and for signal status. They basically would much rather, specifically that new generation, would much rather you, even if you go about it humbly from the beginning, but much more thoughtful in how you sort of do your concept than try to fix it after you launch it all backwards. So
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, Samar, for putting it that way and for all of these like beautiful contributions. I hope that you enjoyed this live as much as I
thank you
did.
so much. It was amazing. I really appreciate talking to you. You're like such a plethora of incredible knowledge and passion in
Thank you
retail,
so much.
and I can't wait to talk more in the future and hear all your future episodes as well from all the
Thank you
different.
so much. And I hope we get the chance to meet in either New York or Paris for
Yes, we will. I know
a
we will.
future episode.
I
Thank
know
you
that's a
so much,
fact.
Samar.
Thank you. Talk soon.
And See you soon, and hopefully, we get more on these topics on Live with Ghalia. Just a reminder, this session is available on YouTube and is accessible anytime, anywhere. So thank you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Thank you. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care.